Chapter 1. The Clock That Forgot the Hour. It was on a drizzling October evening, as the lamps of Baker Street glowed against the fog, that I first became aware of the strange matter of the clock. Holmes was lounging upon the settee in his dressing gown, the smoke from his pipe curling like a spectral ribbon in the dim air. I had just returned from my rounds, weary and more than a little damp, when Mrs. Hudson ushered in a most agitated gentleman. He was of middle years, stout about the figure, but with eyes that spoke of restless nights. He carried beneath his arm a parcel wrapped carefully in oilcloth, as though he feared it might be damaged by even the London mist. Setting it upon the table, he removed the wrappings and revealed what at first seemed no more than an ornate clock of French make, gilded and handsomely wrought. Yet there was something decidedly peculiar about it. Its hands were fixed, not at 12, nor any customary hour, but at a most impossible alignment, as though the mechanism had altogether forgotten that hours existed at all. "My name is Mr. Adrian Tolliver," the man began, his voice wavering. "This clock belonged to my late uncle, Sir Humphrey Tolliver, who passed from this world but a fortnight ago. It was his habit to wind it every night at precisely 11. Yet since the morning of his death, the hands refused to move. More curious still, the face alters ever so slightly each day. Yesterday, the hour marks seemed to waver as though sliding in a circle. This morning," here his voice dropped, "this morning they vanished altogether." I could not repress a laugh. "Surely, sir, some defect of workmanship. A watchmaker would soon set it right." Holmes, however, leaned forward, his hawk-like features keen with interest. "A defect of workmanship, Watson? Pray observe." He tapped the casing lightly. "The movement within is of the finest Geneva quality. Such errors are rare as snow in Cairo. No, there is more here." Tolliver nodded eagerly. "Precisely, Mr. Holmes, that is not all. 2 days after my uncle's funeral, a note arrived at my house. No signature, no address, only these words: 'When the clock forgets the hour, the debt shall be due.'" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, now we approach the marrow. And what debts might your late uncle have left unsettled?" Tolliver hesitated. He was a man of considerable fortune, but his dealings were intricate. There were whispers of money lent and never reclaimed. He had quarrels, too, with a certain Captain Arkwright, a gambler of ill repute, and with his own steward, Mr. Clement Hathershaw. I fear, sir, there may be many who would profit from his death." I could see that Holmes's attention had fastened entirely upon the puzzle. He examined the clock with his lens, scrutinizing every detail: the gilt frame, the porcelain dial, the hinges of the case. His long fingers tapped once, twice upon the frozen hands. "Remarkable," he murmured. "It is not broken. It is designed to appear so." "Designed?" I echoed in astonishment. "Quite so. Consider, Watson, a clock that halts precisely upon its owner's death, whose dial alters daily, and a cryptic note suggesting an unpaid debt. This is no accident of gears. This is a message, a deliberate contrivance by one who understood both time and secrecy." Tolliver wrung his hands. "Then you will take the case?" Holmes settled back, steepling his fingers. "A mystery that begins with a clock that forgets the hour, and a dead man whose debts may not be buried with him. My dear sir, how could I resist?" And so it was that we were drawn into a matter whose outward simplicity, an heirloom refusing to tick, concealed the labyrinth of deceit, enmity, and hidden design that was to follow. I could not know then how deeply it would entangle us, nor how perilously close the shadow of danger would fall upon both Holmes and myself before that strange clock struck its final reckoning. Chapter 2. The First discussion. Holmes remained seated with the strange clock before him, his keen gaze fixed upon its silent face, as though he sought to draw forth its secrets by sheer force of observation. The dim light of the lamps glimmered across the gilt casing, and for a moment the only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the fire upon the hearth. Mr. Tolliver shifted uneasily in his chair, his hat clenched so tightly in his hand that its brim had lost all shape. "You see, Mr. Holmes," he said at length, "my uncle was a man of strong routines. He dined at the same hour each day, he wound this clock every night before retiring, and he kept his household accounts with scrupulous detail. For the clock to betray him thus, it is as if it conspires with some hidden hand." Holmes smiled faintly. "Clocks do not conspire, Mr. Tolliver, but men are quite another matter. When an object of mechanism performs in a manner contrary to its design, it is rarely accident, it is intent. I should be glad to know, what did your uncle say of this clock in life?" "Very little," Tolliver admitted. "It stood upon the mantel in his study. He often glanced at it, but he never spoke of it to me, nor to my cousins, as far as I am aware." Holmes drew out his lens again and examined the casing. "Watson, note the construction, finest enamel, delicate inlay, and beneath the gilt a trace of tarnish. French work, I should judge, but not recent, late 18th century. And here," he pressed a hidden latch upon the side, "a compartment." The lid sprang open, revealing a narrow cavity, empty save for a scrap of dark cloth, no larger than a postage stamp. Holmes turned it over between his fingers. "Velvet, black, and worn at the edges. Curious, is it not, that a keepsake clock should conceal such a token?" Tolliver's face paled. "I had no notion that compartment existed. What does it mean?" "It means," said Holmes, "that your uncle possessed secrets of which his family knew nothing. Tell me, Mr. Tolliver, at what hour was he discovered dead?" "Shortly after dawn. His manservant found him in the study. The physician declared it apoplexy, and we thought no more of it." "Apoplexy, perhaps, or perhaps not." Holmes's voice was grave. "I shall need to view the study and the house at once. You will permit that?" "Gladly," said Tolliver. "Any aid in shedding light upon this dreadful affair." When at last the gentleman had departed, leaving the enigmatic clock behind, I turned to Holmes with no small measure of bewilderment. "Surely, Holmes, you cannot suspect foul play merely from a broken timepiece?" Holmes lit a fresh match and set his pipe aglow, sending up another wreath of smoke. "Not merely from the timepiece, Watson, but combine it with the anonymous note. When the clock forgets the hour, the debt shall be due, and we have a pattern that is far too deliberate to ignore. You see the suggestion of vengeance, of a reckoning timed to coincide with death?" I frowned. "But why a clock? Why not a letter or direct threat?" "Because, my dear fellow, a clock is the most intimate reminder of time itself. It ticks away the moments of our lives. To subvert that mechanism, to render it incapable of keeping the hour, is a symbolic act. It declares that time itself has been manipulated. That is no chance gesture." I could not withhold a shiver. "Then you believe the note and the clock came from the same hand?" Holmes inclined his head. "I should be astonished if they did not. Our task is to discover whose hand it was and what debt they claim as due. To that end, we must consider Sir Humphrey's associates, a gambler, you recall, and a steward with whom relations were strained. It is not the conduct of an enemy to send threats after a man's death. It is the conduct of one who wishes the heirs to tremble. You think then the danger lies not behind, but ahead?" "Precisely, Watson. The late Sir Humphrey may be beyond harm, but his nephew has inherited more than a fortune. He has inherited peril." Holmes rose and crossed the room, his long figure moving with restless energy. "There is method in this contrivance. It is the very sort of riddle that delights me. We shall call upon the Tolliver residence tomorrow. There is nothing so instructive as the scene of a man's last hour. As I made my notes that evening, I reflected upon the singular turn the case had taken. A clock that forgot the hour, a dead man, a cryptic note hinting at debts unknown, and my friend's quicksilver mind already racing beyond what my own could grasp. I had no doubt that the morrow would bring revelations, though whether they would ease or deepen the mystery, I could not yet guess. Chapter 3. A Scene of Deception. The following morning broke grey and heavy with fog, that peculiar London mist, which blurs the outlines of houses and makes even familiar streets seem unfamiliar. Holmes was in his element, striding along with that peculiar intensity which came upon him at the scent of a puzzle. I followed in his wake as our hansom carried us through the shrouded avenues to the Tolliver residence, a sober townhouse of brick and ivy that loomed sombrely against the pale sky. Mr. Adrian Tolliver received us with gratitude and ushered us at once into the study where his uncle had breathed his last. The room was a place of dignity and order, shelves lined with heavy tomes, an oak desk polished to a dull shine, and the faint odour of tobacco lingering in the air. Yet there was, too, an uneasiness about the place, as though the shadow of Sir Humphrey's sudden death had not yet been lifted. Holmes paused upon the threshold and let his gaze wander across the chamber with that penetrating stillness which always struck me. His eyes alighted upon the hearth, upon the chair where the deceased was said to have collapsed, upon the window, curtains half drawn against the street. He advanced without a word, every movement measured, every detail absorbed. "You will observe, Watson," he murmured, "that the dust upon the mantel is disturbed, save in one spot where it lies thicker. Something stood here and was removed." I followed his gaze. The faint outline of an object was visible upon the wood, though it had been hastily brushed. Tolliver frowned. "I know of nothing missing. My uncle's clock stood always upon that mantel until I carried it to your rooms." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Then tell me, Mr. Tolliver, what stood at its side, for here we see the impression of a second object, rectangular, yet gone." Tolliver shook his head helplessly. "I cannot say." Holmes crouched near the hearthrug. "And here, Watson, note this indentation." A chair was dragged hastily across the floor. "But for what purpose?" He reached beneath the desk and withdrew a small scrap of paper, half charred as though from the fire. Upon it were visible only 3 words, "A debt unpaid," before the rest crumbled into ash. Tolliver uttered an exclamation. "Another note, or part of one," said Holmes quietly. "Observe how it was burned. Someone attempted to destroy it, yet left this fragment behind. Deception, Watson, is ever clumsy in the small details." Holmes continued his survey. He examined the latch of the window, running his fingers along its frame. "Securely locked from within. That matches the account of the manservant." "Indeed," said Tolliver. "It was he who found the body at this very desk." Holmes bent low, scrutinizing the rug beneath the chair. "And here we have a singular stain, dark, yet not blood. Watson, what do you make of it?" I touched it with caution. "Ink, surely." Holmes smiled faintly. "So it seems. Yet note how it spreads. Ink, yes, but diluted, almost as if poured with water. What does one wash away with such care?" He rose, eyes glittering with thought. We turned our attention then to the great oak desk. Its drawers were orderly, filled with ledgers, correspondence, and accounts. Yet Holmes plucked one ledger forth and set it upon the surface. "Do you mark this, Watson? The entries here cease abruptly 3 days before Sir Humphrey's death. and this final page blank but faintly indented, as if writing were pressed upon it, then torn away. He held the page up to the light. "We shall render this legible in due time. A rubbing will suffice, but it is enough now to say that Sir Humphrey wrote words he or another did not wish preserved. Adrian Tolliver, pale and unsettled, spoke with difficulty. Then my uncle did not die so naturally as we believed. Holmes replaced the ledger with care. We do not yet pronounce upon the manner of his death, but we may declare with certainty that deception has played a hand here. A note destroyed, a ledger page torn, a stain disguised. These are no random occurrences. They point to design. Someone has labored to mislead." As we departed the study, Holmes cast a final glance at the chamber. His voice, low yet resolute, reached only my ear. "This is no mere family quarrel, Watson. The clock was but the opening move. We are confronted with a game of craft, in which every piece has been placed with deliberation, and if I mistake not, the board upon which it is played stretches far beyond these walls." I could not help but feel a chill as we descended the stair. The house seemed to close in around us, and I sensed that the mystery had only begun to tighten its grip. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Suspects. The hours following our examination of Sir Humphrey's study were given over to conversation with those whose names had already emerged from the fog of uncertainty. Holmes, in his characteristically quiet yet commanding manner, requested that Mr. Tolliver assemble the principal figures of his late uncle's circle under the pretext of clarifying estate matters. The result was a curious tableau, 3 individuals, each distinct in manner and temperament, yet all bound by invisible cords to the man whose death had unsettled them. We met them in the drawing-room, a chamber less sombre than the study, where the weak sun forced its way through tall windows and cast pale lines across the carpet. Holmes sat near the fireplace, his long figure composed but alert, while I placed myself discreetly at his side, notebook ready. Mr. Tolliver acted the uneasy host, ushering each guest with nervous courtesy. The first to arrive was Captain Nathaniel Arkwright, a man of middle age whose once handsome face had grown coarse from indulgence. His uniform had long since been set aside for a velvet coat, but his bearing retained something of martial sharpness. He carried himself with the insolent ease of one accustomed to risk and debt, and his eyes roved the room with scarcely concealed disdain. "So," he drawled, "we are to answer questions about poor Sir Humphrey. A pity, to be sure. But what is there to say? The man lived. The man died of apoplexy, was it not?" Holmes regarded him steadily. "It was so declared. Yet it is curious, is it not, that a gentleman of his habits and vigour should be seized so suddenly?" Arkwright shrugged. "Death comes when it pleases, Mr. Holmes. I suppose even the punctual may be late for nothing but the grave." He laughed at his own jest, though no one joined him. Next entered Clement Hathershaw, the steward. Tall, spare, and grave of countenance, he bore himself with the dignity of one who had long served the house. Yet beneath that outward composure I detected a strain, as though his loyalty carried weight enough to bend his shoulders. His gaze rested upon the floor, and his replies came in measured tones. "I served Sir Humphrey faithfully for 20 years, he said when asked of his master's affairs. "He was exacting, yes, but generous when it pleased him. His accounts were always in order, save when he chose secrecy. There were matters I was not privy to, and in those I did not intrude." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A wise discretion, Mr. Hathershaw. Yet discretion sometimes shields knowledge that would prove valuable. Did your master ever confide in you regarding debts?" The steward's lips tightened. "He spoke seldom of such things. I heard whispers of loans made, not always to reputable men, but to me he said nothing. The third was a lady, Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, Sir Humphrey's ward and distant relation, who had lived under his roof since childhood. She was of perhaps 25, her features delicate, her eyes both sorrowful and searching. She carried herself with quiet strength, though grief seemed to hover about her like a veil. "I loved my uncle," she said softly, "though he was not always easy of temper. He kept his study locked, and there were hours when none might disturb him. Yet he cared for me as he knew how, and I owe him much. If he had enemies, I pray they find no triumph in his death." Holmes studied her with unusual gentleness. "Did you ever observe anything strange in his habits of late? Anything that might suggest fear or unease?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. In the last weeks he grew restless. He paced at night, and I once heard him mutter of time running short. When I asked, he bade me forget it, but there was a shadow upon him, and I believe it deepened until the end." Holmes inclined his head. "Your candour is of great service, Miss Whitcomb." Thus the three stood before us, the dissolute gambler, the silent steward, and the loyal ward, each with a distinct tie to the deceased, each shadowed by some unspoken weight. Holmes spoke little, yet I saw the quick dart of his eyes, the silent taking of measure. He was building his web, thread by thread, and I knew it was only a matter of time before one of these figures would find themselves ensnared. As we took our leave, Holmes remarked to me in a tone of quiet satisfaction, "You perceive, Watson, how each plays a part, the gambler with debts, the steward with silence, the ward with sorrow. Yet behind their words lies a common note, the suggestion that Sir Humphrey's death was anticipated. And when death is anticipated, Watson, one must ask, by whom and to what end?" Chapter 5. First Suspects. A red herring. When we departed the Tolliver residence that afternoon, the fog had thickened into a heavy pall that seemed to press down upon the very streets. Holmes walked briskly beside me, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes distant in thought. I had grown accustomed to these silences of his, yet I sensed in the rigidity of his stride that his mind was weaving together the impressions of our morning. "It is curious, Watson," he said at last, "how men and women reveal themselves less by what they say than by what they seek to conceal. Did you observe the gambler's ease, the steward's restraint, and the ward's hesitation? Each tone a distinct chord, yet all playing to the same melody of secrecy." "And which strikes you as most false?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "Falsehood is seldom absolute. It is a mixture like paint upon a palette. But we may profit by testing which shade proves most deceptive. Let us begin with Captain Arkwright. The man reeks of debt as surely as of tobacco. His presence in Sir Humphrey's circle is itself an enigma. That evening we paid a call upon a certain club in Pall Mall where the captain was known to frequent. Holmes's connection secured us a quiet corner from which we might observe. The room was a haze of smoke, the air thick with the rattle of dice and the clink of glasses. At a table near the fire sat Arkwright, laughing too loudly, his hand heavy upon the shoulder of another gamester. A pile of notes and coins lay before him, which dwindled steadily as the hours passed. "Mark him, Watson," whispered Holmes. "A man of fortune does not risk so recklessly. He plays not to win but to forget." When at length Arkwright staggered into the street, Holmes followed at a measured distance. We traced him through twisting alleys until he paused at a narrow doorway. A brief exchange passed between him and a cloaked figure, money-changing hands before they parted swiftly. Holmes's hand touched my sleeve. "Observe, Watson, debt indeed, but note his creditor is too cautious, too deliberate. This is no common usurer. This link requires further pursuit. The next morning, however, Holmes's attention shifted. Arkwright may be a rogue, but roguery is not murder. His carelessness would betray him at once if he sought to contrive such a scheme. No, we must look elsewhere for precision. We returned then to the matter of Clement Hathershaw, the steward. Holmes requested access to the household accounts, and Mr. Tolliver, though reluctant, granted it. I watched as Holmes bent over the ledgers with that consuming focus which seemed to shut out the world. His thin fingers turned each page with care, his eyes darting across figures, pausing, retracing. "Remarkable," he murmured at length. "The steward is thorough, yet see here, entries vanish in the weeks before Sir Humphrey's death, entire sums unaccounted for. And when numbers disappear, Watson, one must ask, into whose pocket do they fall?" I could not deny the implication, though I urged caution. Yet we have no proof that Hathershaw acted for himself. He may have served another's bidding. "True," said Holmes, "but service carried out in silence becomes complicity." That evening, as we walked along Baker Street, Holmes grew uncharacteristically grave. "We tread upon uncertain ground, Watson. Arkwright is too clumsy, Hathershaw perhaps too careful, and the young lady, she is shrouded in sorrow, yet sorrow itself may mask much. But there is one constant amidst these shifting impressions, the clock. It remains the true centre of the design. Until we understand why Sir Humphrey possessed a clock that forgot the hour, all else is conjecture." I could not help but reflect upon the fragment we had discovered in the study, with its ominous words, "Debt unpaid." If the clock were indeed the emblem of a reckoning, then someone in that circle had wound its hands toward tragedy. Holmes's gaze, sharp beneath the lamplight, turned upon me. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall test the steward's loyalty. A red herring may glitter in shallow water, but the true fish lies deeper. Let us see which way the current runs." Thus the stage was set for the next movement in the mystery. The gambler, the steward, the ward, all remained beneath suspicion, yet none could yet be named as guilty. Holmes, however, had fixed his eyes upon a course, and I felt in my bones that the morrow would either strip away illusion or plunge us deeper into the shadows. Chapter 6. The Steward's Silence. The next morning broke with a pale sun struggling through the clouds, yet there was little warmth in its light. Holmes and I returned once more to the Tolliver residence, summoned under the guise of examining further papers of the estate. In truth, Holmes intended to confront Clement Hathershaw, whose careful restraint had intrigued him far more than Captain Arkwright's boisterous vice. We found the steward in his small office adjoining the servants' quarters. The room was austere, lined with shelves of records and ledgers, every surface spotless, every paper neatly arranged. Hathershaw rose as we entered, his tall frame casting a lean shadow across the desk. His manner was outwardly respectful, yet I sensed a guardedness behind his eyes, as though he stood perpetually upon a threshold he dared not cross. "Mr. Hathershaw," Holmes began evenly, "you have served this household for 2 decades. Few men could claim such constancy. Tell me, did your loyalty to Sir Humphrey extend even into matters he wished concealed?" The steward stiffened. "Sir, I carried out my duties with exactness. If my master chose secrecy, it was not for me to question." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And yet secrecy has its cost. These ledgers, which you keep with admirable precision, display sudden gaps, entries absent, sums unaccounted for. Are we to believe that such omissions escaped your eye?" For a moment Hathershaw's lips pressed tight, as though the truth trembled against his will. At last he spoke. "There were transactions which Sir Humphrey required I not record." Funds passed beyond my knowledge. He told me only that the debts must be honoured swiftly and that it was not for me to ask of their nature. Holmes leaned forward. Debts, you say? Of what magnitude? Considerable, Hathershaw admitted reluctantly. Gold, and more than once. He seemed pressed of late. Though he bore it with his usual pride, I feared— He broke off, lowering his eyes. You feared what? Holmes urged gently. That it would ruin him, the steward said at last. Or worse, that it would consume him. In his final days he spoke with agitation, and once I heard him mutter of a reckoning long postponed. Yet when I asked, he bade me silence. Holmes regarded him in silence for a moment, then turned to the desk. He ran a finger along the ledgers, pausing at a blank page. You are an honest man, Mr. Hathershaw. Your silence has been loyalty, not conspiracy. But loyalty, in this case, has left shadows where we need light. Shadows, I may add, in which another's hand may strike unseen. The steward's expression tightened. I have told you all I know. If my master dealt with men of ill repute, I was not their witness. Holmes straightened. Not their witness, perhaps, but their shadow may have touched you nonetheless. Consider this. If Sir Humphrey carried debts of magnitude, who had the most to gain by his sudden death? His heir, certainly. But perhaps also those who sought repayment. If death intervenes, debts die with the debtor, unless a threat lingers, designed to fall upon the living. At this, Hathershaw's composure faltered. You believe his nephew endangered? Holmes's voice was low. I believe someone intends to collect a debt not measured in gold alone, and the clock, Mr. Hathershaw, is the token by which that collection is marked. We left the steward pale and unsettled, and as we walked once more through the hall, I could not restrain my doubts. Holmes, you speak of debts, of reckoning, yet we tread still in conjecture. The steward's testimony gives us shadows, not substance. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Shadows, Watson, are but the outlines cast by light. Already we perceive shape. The steward's silence confirms that Sir Humphrey concealed something grave, something tied to money and time. It is not yet proof, but it narrows the field. As we emerged into the street, the fog swirled anew about us, as though echoing the cloud upon the case. Holmes paused, drew deeply upon his pipe, and spoke with quiet resolve. Arkwright gambles away his fortunes. Hathershaw shields his master's secrets. Miss Whitcomb mourns with hidden fear. Each may be innocent, yet each holds a fragment of the truth. Our task is to piece them together before the clock tolls again, if, indeed, it ever tolls at all. I followed him down the cobbled street with a weight upon my heart, for I knew that his words were no idle flourish. There was danger in this mystery, danger that seemed to draw nearer with each step we took. Chapter 7. The Ward's Secret. Holmes was not one to let sentiment govern his course, yet I could tell that the figure of Miss Eleanor Whitcomb had remained in his thoughts since our first interview. There was something in her hesitation, in the weight of her grief, mingled with an unspoken fear, which had impressed itself upon his keen perception. On the morning following our conversation with Hathershaw, Holmes announced with quiet certainty that we must call upon her once more. We found Miss Whitcomb in the morning room of the Tolliver residence, seated by the window where a pale shaft of winter light fell across her features. She greeted us with composure, though her eyes betrayed the shadow of many sleepless nights. Holmes, bowing with grave courtesy, placed himself opposite her, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Miss Whitcomb," he began, "forgive our intrusion. Yet you must know that truth often emerges not in the first telling, but in the second. I would therefore beg of you to recall again those final days of your guardian's life. Anything, however slight, may hold significance. She looked at him with quiet resolution. "I have already told you what I can, Mr. Holmes. My uncle was restless, anxious, and spoke of time running short. Beyond that, I know little." Holmes inclined his head. "And yet, Miss Whitcomb, there are silences which speak louder than words. Permit me to be frank. You feared your uncle, did you not?" The colour rose in her cheeks. "I feared him? He was stern, yes, he could be harsh, but he provided for me." Holmes's eyes never wavered. "And you obeyed him, as any dependent must. Yet obedience may conceal knowledge too heavy to bear. Tell me, did you ever see among his possessions the note of which we have fragments, speaking of a debt unpaid?" Her hands tightened upon the edge of her chair. For a long moment she seemed to struggle. Then, with a sigh, she yielded. "Yes, I saw such a note. It was 3 nights before his death. He had left it upon his desk, and I entered to bid him good evening. When he realized I had glimpsed the words, he flew into anger such as I had never before witnessed. He seized the paper and burned it before my eyes. He told me never to speak of it, that the hour was nearer than I could imagine. His face was pale, as if haunted, and I left him trembling." Holmes leaned forward. "You see, Watson, the fragment we found was no accident. There were others, destroyed in haste. Now, Miss Whitcomb, I must press further. Did Sir Humphrey ever confide in you the nature of this debt?" She shook her head, but her voice trembled. "Not in words. Yet once, when he thought himself alone, I heard him utter a name I did not know. He whispered it with dread, as though it held power over him." Holmes's eyes flashed. "The name, Miss Whitcomb?" "Chandler," she said softly. "That was the name. I asked him who it was, but he only muttered, 'The clock will tell,' and sent me from the room." Holmes rose at once, his face alight with that peculiar energy which came when a fresh thread revealed itself. "Chandler! Mark that, Watson. A name is the seed of all discovery, and here we have it at last." Miss Whitcomb watched him with apprehension. "Mr. Holmes, do you believe my uncle was murdered?" Holmes regarded her gravely. "I believe your uncle was entangled in a web of obligations he could neither honour nor escape. Whether death came by his own hand, by nature's cruelty, or by design of another, we are yet to prove. But the clock, the debt, and this name Chandler are not coincidence. They are the very fibres of the noose that tightened about him." She bowed her head, tears welling, yet there was relief too, as though confession had eased a burden long borne in silence. Holmes touched his hat and led me from the chamber. Once in the street, I turned eagerly to him. "Holmes, what do you make of this Chandler? Is he debtor, creditor, or worse?" "Patience, Watson," Holmes replied with quiet force. "Chandler is no common creditor, of that we may be certain. His name was spoken in fear, not in anger. We must seek him, and swiftly. Yet let us not forget, when one name emerges from the shadows, it is because another has placed it there. Let us discover which hand guides the clock's silent face." With that, he strode forward into the fog, and I followed with heart quickened, sensing that the mystery had just deepened into perilous waters. Chapter 8. The Name in the Shadows. The name Chandler lingered in the air like a whisper that refused to fade. Holmes spoke it often that day, turning it over like a stone in his hand, testing its weight, searching its edges for some mark that might yield a trace. By mid-morning we had returned to Baker Street, where Holmes cast aside his coat and immediately immersed himself in the vast archive of names and notes he kept in his personal index, alphabetized labyrinth of London's obscure souls collected over years of study and cases both solved and unsolved. "Chandler," he muttered, flicking through the drawers. is not uncommon. We must narrow the field. We seek not a tradesman, not a banker, but a shadow, someone whose presence struck fear into Sir Humphrey Tolliver. That is the scent we follow. Page after page passed beneath his fingers, references to Chandlers in business law and even scandal. But Holmes dismissed each with a shake of the head. Too respectable, too visible, no. We require someone whose footprints are not found in the daylight, but pressed lightly into the darker paths. At last he paused, his finger resting on a brief entry scrawled in his hand. Chandler, G., associated with speculative finance, 1889-91, disgraced following fraudulent railway bonds, known to use false names. Last linked to Tolliver Holdings, 1891, disappeared thereafter. Suspected blackmailer, dangerous. Holmes's eyes narrowed. There he is. Connected to Tolliver? I asked, peering over his shoulder. Indeed, financial dealings buried in false accounts but clearly tied. It seems Sir Humphrey's past was not as silent as he wished, and if this Chandler resurfaced, it would explain much. But why now? Why the clock? Why the threat only after Sir Humphrey's death? Holmes paced. That, Watson, is the crux. Either Chandler was never truly gone, or someone is invoking his name for purposes of their own. In either case, we must follow the trail back to 1891. Call it resurrection or impersonation, the game is the same. By mid-afternoon, Holmes had arranged a meeting with one of his more dubious contacts, a man named Strickland, who had long moved in the periphery of London's less reputable circles. We met him beneath a railway arch in Southwark, where the smoke and iron framed a world hidden from polite society. Strickland was a wiry man with the look of someone always listening for footsteps behind him. He greeted Holmes with a crooked grin. "You never come calling for tea, Mr. Holmes. What troubles caught your scent this time?" "A name," said Holmes simply. "Gideon Chandler." At that, the grin faded. "Now there's a whisper I haven't heard in years. Thought he was drowned or vanished." "Was he?" Strickland shrugged. "Hard to say. He had fingers in every pot, blackmail, forgery, false inheritance claims, had a knack for knowing when to disappear. They say he had a book, a ledger of every man who ever owed him, and what they feared most. Then poof, gone." Holmes's expression darkened. "Do you know of any sighting since?" "There was talk," Strickland said after a pause. 3 months ago, a solicitor in Whitechapel claimed someone came asking after old Tolliver accounts, gave a false name, but asked the wrong questions. The man had a scar down his left cheek. That sound familiar?" Holmes's eyes lit with sudden focus. "That it does. A man answering that description was mentioned once in the context of Chandler's disappearance. He may not be Chandler, but he is close." As we parted ways with Strickland, Holmes turned to me with quiet intensity. "Do you see, Watson? We chase not merely a memory, but a ghost someone wants us to believe in. The note, the clock, the whispered name. It may be Chandler, or someone using the fear his name still commands." "Then the clock is a signal?" I asked. "Perhaps a warning," Holmes said grimly. "Or a claim. Time, debt, and retribution. Whoever wound that clock meant it to strike fear, not the hour." The wind bit as we stepped onto the street once more, and the fog was beginning to descend. Holmes pulled his collar high and walked faster. "We must return to the Tolliver house, Watson. If this ghost walks, it may walk in flesh, and someone within that household may already know it." As I followed him back through the gathering mist, I could not help but feel the noose tightening around us, not merely of mystery, but of something older and darker, where names were weapons and time itself was used to draw blood. Chapter 9. The Second Attempt. The fog had thickened into a grey wall by the time we arrived once more at the Tolliver residence. The gas lamps glowed dim and orange through the haze, casting blurred halos that seemed to float in the air. Holmes was silent on the ride over, his fingers drumming a deliberate rhythm on his cane. I had come to recognize that as a sign, not of impatience, but of mounting calculation. Some silent pattern in his mind was aligning, piece by piece, and I could sense the shift. Mr. Tolliver met us at the door, clearly unsettled. His face was drawn, his speech hurried. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank heavens. Something dreadful has occurred. Miss Whitcomb. She was attacked." We followed him swiftly through the hall. "Is she harmed?" Holmes asked, sharp with concern. "No," Tolliver replied. "Shaken, but not wounded. It happened scarcely an hour ago. She was in the study, alone, when someone entered behind her. She never saw his face. He seized her from behind. She struggled, and he fled when she screamed." "Why was she in the study?" Holmes asked. "She said she could not sleep," Tolliver said. "She wished to sit in the chair her uncle used, as she often did when troubled. The room had been left unlocked. We thought nothing of it." Holmes's expression grew grave. "Then we were wrong to think the dead man's secrets died with him." We found Miss Whitcomb in the drawing-room, pale but composed. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted a glass of brandy. Holmes approached gently. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, "you are brave to have fought back. Tell me only what you recall. Every detail matters." She took a breath. It was quiet. I had just lit a lamp and sat down. I heard no footsteps, no door. Suddenly arms were around me from behind, strong. One hand went to my mouth, the other to my throat, but I kicked the side table over. The guillard crash must have startled him. He fled. "Did he speak?" Holmes asked. She shook her head. "Not a word, but I did smell something." "Smell?" "Clove oil," she said softly. "It was strong, sharp. I remembered it after he ran." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Clove oil. Interesting." I looked to him. "A barber's scent?" "Or a disguise," he murmured. "Clove masks other odours. It can conceal tobacco, spirits, even blood." He turned to Tolliver. "Where is Hathershaw?" "In his quarters, I believe." Holmes wasted no time. We found the steward alone, seated in thought, startled by our arrival. His eyes darted instinctively to us. "Miss Whitcomb, is she well?" "She was attacked," Holmes said plainly. "In the study?" Hathershaw rose at once, visibly shaken. "Good Lord, by whom?" Holmes studied him. "That is the question. Tell me, Mr. Hathershaw, do you use clove oil?" The steward blinked. I keep some. For my joints on occasion. It eases the pain. Why?" Holmes said nothing more. We returned to the study, where the overturned lamp and toppled table bore silent testimony to the struggle. Holmes crouched near the floor. His hand swept lightly beneath the edge of the hearthrug and came away with a small object. He held it up. A button, black, smooth, unadorned. "No cloth attached," he muttered. "Torn clean." He turned to Miss Whitcomb. "Did you strike him?" I tried to twist away. My shoulder struck his chest. I felt something give, but I was too frightened to see what. Holmes held the button thoughtfully, then slipped it into his coat. "One more clue," he said, "and one step closer." That evening, back at Baker Street, Holmes sat long in silence, the clock ticking solemnly on the mantel. At last, he spoke. The clock, the note, the shadow of Chandler, all designed to stir fear. But now the pattern escalates. Whoever attacked Miss Whitcomb did not seek silence. He sought something hidden, likely something her uncle left behind. "Do you believe the attack was meant to kill?" I asked. "No," Holmes said quietly. "Not yet. The strike was clumsy. It was a warning, or a search interrupted. But it tells us this. The secret Sir Humphrey kept did not die with him. It remains somewhere in that house, and someone is desperate to find it before we do. He stood, gazing out into the fog-cloaked street. Time, Watson, is no longer on our side. We must find the truth before the clock forgets the hour once more. Ponce and time itself was used to draw blood. Chapter 10. The true motive surfaces. By the following morning, Holmes's mood had grown unusually still, not the stillness of idleness, but the focused silence of a mind drawing together many threads at once. He stood long at the window of our Baker Street lodgings, arms folded, his eyes not on the street below, but on the theatre of thought behind them. "Watson," he said without turning, "we must stop thinking of Sir Humphrey's death as the beginning. It was merely the point at which the curtain rose. The real play began long before, when a man named Chandler first placed him in his debt." I set down my tea. "And you believe Chandler himself has returned?" "Whether the man or his ghost, the effect is the same. What matters now is not only who attacked Miss Whitcomb, but what they were searching for. Something remains in that house, something Sir Humphrey hid. The clock, the note, the attack, they are all signs of urgency." We returned to the Tolliver residence before noon. Holmes requested, rather pointedly, that the household leave him alone in the study. I followed close behind, notebook in hand. He paced the room slowly, as if listening to the space itself. Then he halted before the mantel where the clock had once stood. "This was the altar," he said. "The clock wasn't just an heirloom, it was a sentinel. And when Sir Humphrey died, it was triggered, intentionally so. A mechanical will." "You mean it was designed to stop the moment he died?" "Not precisely. But it was built to react to something, perhaps the final winding, or the lack of it. He had it modified, the shifting face, the vanishing numbers, symbolic, yes, but also practical. A message for the one who knew how to read it." Holmes's eyes drifted to the bookcase near the hearth. "Tell me, Watson, what is missing from this shelf?" I glanced across the spines. "Volume 2 of the family journals. Volumes I and 3 are here." "Precisely." Holmes ran a finger along the dust-lined edge where the missing book had once stood. "Our intruder, or Sir Humphrey himself, removed it." "I'd wager the latter. He knew someone was coming. Perhaps he feared they would find it. Or perhaps he hoped they would not." Holmes moved then to the desk. He opened each drawer, not in haste, but with methodical care. From the lower left he withdrew a ledger I had not seen before, thinner, older. He opened it to reveal columns of names, dates, and amounts. Some names were marked with a faint cross. One had been scrubbed nearly to illegibility. Holmes traced that spot gently. "This was Chandler's ledger," he said softly. "Or rather the copy Sir Humphrey made of it. Tolliver was no fool. He feared Chandler. But he kept the record, perhaps as protection, perhaps out of guilt." "Then this was what the intruder saw?" "Not quite," Holmes said. "This ledger explains the pressure, but not the purpose. Look here." He turned to the final page. "There's a note written in a different hand. If the clock forgets the hour, look beneath the second cinder." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Ah, now we begin." We knelt before the fireplace. Holmes removed the iron grate and sifted gently through the ashes. The layer was undisturbed, cold. But beneath the second cinder, from the left, he uncovered a thin tile of soot-darkened wood. He pried it free to reveal a hollow cavity no larger than a cigar box. Inside lay a sealed envelope and a small brass key. He lifted them reverently. Sir Humphrey left something behind, something not meant for Chandler, or whoever now uses his name, but for someone else. "Miss Whitcomb?" I asked. Holmes did not answer immediately. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed but firm. Written in a firm, slanted hand were the words, "To whomever finds this, know that I repaid every debt except one." I could not undo what was done in '91, nor silence the man who holds it. But I have kept the truth from him. The key opens the clock. Let what's inside speak for me. Holmes sat back, eyes gleaming. It was never about money, Watson. The true debt was moral, a crime covered in silence, a truth locked inside that infernal clock. Then we must open it. We shall, Holmes said, but not here, and not yet. Someone is watching. Whoever attacked Miss Whitcomb will return if they suspect we've found it. So let us be still for now, like the clock. Let them think the hour has not yet come. He stood, pocketed the key, and closed the secret compartment. And when it does strike, Watson, it will strike very loud indeed. Chapter 11, The Bait, Holmes's Strategy. The following day dawned sharp and still. The fog momentarily lifted, as though London itself were holding its breath. Holmes spent the early hours in silence, save for the soft rustle of paper and the occasional scratch of his pen. He wrote quickly, decisively, then handed me the note with a rare gleam in his eye. "It is time, Watson," he said, "to let our unknown friend believe the hour has arrived." The note was addressed to Adrian Tolliver and read, simply, "The ledger has been recovered. The clock shall be opened tonight. Tell no one." S.H. Holmes sealed it, handed it to a trusted messenger boy, and then turned to me. "It is not a lie," he said, "but it is not yet the full truth either. We must allow them to act, believing the secret is nearly exposed." "You expect them to return?" I asked. "I expect them to panic," he replied. "And panic breeds carelessness." That afternoon, Holmes took the clock from our rooms and returned it to its rightful place on the Tolliver mantel. He wiped it clean, polished its surface, and with great care inserted the brass key we had retrieved. The clock did not tick, but the key turned with a gentle click, activating, Holmes surmised, some hidden compartment within. "We will not open it yet," he said. "We will make it appear sealed. The real contents, whatever Tolliver hid inside, must remain untouched until our visitor reveals themselves." We left the study undisturbed and joined Mr. Tolliver and Miss Whitcomb for supper. The meal passed in a state of quiet tension. Holmes spoke little, and Eleanor, though calm, glanced often toward the hallway. Adrian, for his part, seemed preoccupied and unusually pale. After the table was cleared, Holmes rose. "Miss Whitcomb, I believe it wise that you sleep in your upstairs chamber this evening, and that you lock the door behind you." She hesitated. "You expect another attempt?" Holmes offered a small, reassuring nod. "If not tonight, then soon, but I believe tonight holds the strongest lure." He then turned to Tolliver. "Leave the house key with me, and tell the servants not to disturb the study whatever they hear. Watson and I will remain close by." Shortly before midnight, Holmes and I positioned ourselves in the corridor adjoining the study, concealed behind a velvet drapery that hung beside the parlour door. The hallway was cloaked in shadow, save for the thin sliver of light spilling from beneath the study door, left intentionally ajar. Holmes's breathing was steady, eyes fixed on the doorway. Time passed slowly, the great silence of the house broken only by the occasional groan of the timbers and the steady tick of the upstairs hall clock. Then footsteps, soft, careful, not from above, but from the servants' entrance at the rear. A pause. A key turned in a lock. Holmes's hand touched my arm. I held my breath. The figure slipped into the hallway, a dark shape, slight but swift, moving with familiarity toward the study. No light was struck. They entered as if by muscle memory. The door closed softly behind them. Holmes waited only a moment, then stepped silently into the hall. I followed, revolver in hand. He opened the door with a sharp push. "Hold where you are," Holmes commanded. The intruder froze. Light from the hallway fell across his face. It was not a stranger, it was Adrian Tolliver. He stood before the mantel, hand still on the clock. His face was a mixture of guilt and fury. "I only wanted to see it," he said hoarsely. "To know what he hid. You don't understand. I've waited, wondered for years." Holmes's voice was cold. "So you staged the attack on Miss Whitcomb, sent the note, tried to frighten your way to a truth your uncle denied you?" Tolliver shook his head wildly. "No, I didn't attack her, I swear. I didn't even know there was a key until today. But the name Chandler, yes, I knew it. My father was ruined by him. My uncle never spoke of it, but I knew. That's why I needed to see the contents before someone else did." Holmes stepped forward. "Someone else already has." A shadow passed across his face, and I saw that Tolliver understood the implication. There was another. Holmes took the clock gently from his hands. "You are not the spider at the center of this web, Mr. Tolliver, but you are close enough to it that your curiosity has nearly undone you. You will remain here under watch. I believe our true adversary now knows the bait has been taken, and soon they will come to finish the game." Chapter 12. The Moment of Recognition. Holmes said little as we departed the Tolliver residence that night, the clock once more in his possession, wrapped and secured beneath his coat. Adrian remained behind, seated under the vigilant eye of a constable Holmes had discreetly summoned. The young heir's confession, though not criminal, revealed the depth of desperation now circling this mystery. But Holmes's expression did not speak of satisfaction. It spoke of unfinished work. We returned to Baker Street in the blue hour before dawn. The city was hushed, its restless machinery quieted for a breath between darkness and waking. Holmes placed the clock upon the table, removed his coat, and stood in silence before it. "I've been a fool, Watson," he said at last. I looked up from my notes. "Hardly. You drew Tolliver out with perfect precision." "Not that," Holmes murmured. "The clock. I saw it as symbol, as threat, as relic, but I failed to see it for what it has always been, a container, not merely of a mechanism or a secret compartment, but of time itself. Sir Humphrey built it as a box in which he buried a moment." "You believe what's inside is more than a letter?" Holmes nodded slowly. "I believe what lies inside is evidence of an act. Something done in 1891, something that tied him to Chandler, and now perhaps to murder." With deliberate care, he turned the brass key once more. There was a soft click, then a second, deeper notch, and the back panel of the clock eased open with a gentle sigh of released tension. Within was a small, sealed envelope, identical in shape to the one found beneath the hearth, but older, yellowed at the edges and sealed in wax, bearing the Tolliver crest. Holmes broke it open and unfolded the single sheet within. He read it once, and then twice, his expression darkening with each line. He passed it to me wordlessly. "April 4th, 1891. I, Humphrey Tolliver, do here admit that the death of Jonathan Hale was no accident. It was a debt collected under false pretenses. Chandler provided the forged papers, and I signed them. Hale never knew what was taken until it was too late. He came to plead with me. He begged. I refused him. Hours later, he drowned himself in the Regent's Canal. I have kept this truth buried, even as Chandler vanished. But the guilt is mine. Let this record serve as a reckoning, should the time ever come." H.T. I looked to Holmes in astonishment. This This is the debt? More than that, Holmes said. It's a confession to fraud, yes, but also to moral cowardice. Hale's death was never investigated. It was deemed suicide, the papers buried. But Sir Humphrey feared it would rise again. That's why he kept this. Not to confess, but to control who saw it. And someone knew? Holmes's face was hard. Someone always knows, Watson. That's the truth about secrets. They decay, they leak, and this one has been leaking for 30 years. He turned sharply, going to his archive drawers again, retrieving a worn file. You recall the name Hale? I frowned. Only vaguely, an engineer, I believe, mild scandal in the early 90s. Yes, ruined by false contracts connected to a failed bridge commission. And now we see who orchestrated that ruin. He tossed the file on the desk. But here is the moment of recognition. Eleanor Whitcomb. Hale was her mother's maiden name. I had forgotten. She never mentioned it, never corrected the assumption that she was a Tolliver by blood. I stood, stunned. Then she is the daughter of the man Sir Humphrey destroyed. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Holmes spoke softly. She was placed here by Tolliver himself, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps as a final act of control. But Eleanor has lived under his roof for 20 years, hiding her name, biding her time. And now the clock strikes. The attacks, the note, even Chandler's ghost, it may all have been a curtain she raised. But she was attacked, or claimed to be. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the terrible clarity of truth falling into place. She is no longer the grieving ward, Watson. She is the child of a man wronged, who grew up learning to keep silent and how to wait. He turned back to the clock, still open like a wound. Tonight we confront her, but gently, because if I am right, then vengeance is not behind us. It stands in the parlour wearing mourning black. Chapter 13. The Final Attempt to Escape. Holmes and I returned to the Tolliver house just after dusk, the sky bruised with the colour of approaching storm. Rain tapped faintly at the windows, and the gaslights flickered in the hallway as we were received with polite but wary eyes by the staff. Adrian Tolliver, pale and weary, met us at the door, still under the watch of the constable. "She's upstairs," he said in a low voice. "Miss Whitcomb hasn't spoken much today. I don't think she slept." Holmes inclined his head. "Nor should she have, Mr. Tolliver. It's a difficult thing to mourn a man whose guilt one cannot deny." He passed Tolliver without waiting for a reply, and ascended the stairs with swift purpose. I followed, uncertain of what the evening would bring. Holmes had made no accusations yet, no declarations, and yet the truth, laid bare in Sir Humphrey's confession, now seemed like a stone waiting to be dropped into still water. We found Eleanor in her sitting room, dressed in grey, a book closed upon her lap. Her eyes met Holmes's without surprise. If she feared what he had come to say, she did not show it. "I knew you would return," she said softly. Holmes stepped forward, the sealed confession in his hand. "Miss Whitcomb, or should I say Miss Hale, you are a remarkable actress." A flicker crossed her face. Grief, perhaps, or fatigue. But she did not speak. He continued, "You've lived in this house nearly your entire life. Watched its master rise and age, bearing the knowledge that your father died by his betrayal. I imagine there were many nights you considered telling the truth. But you waited. You chose silence. Why?" She stood slowly, her voice low and precise. "Because I knew the world would believe his name before mine, because I was a child when he took everything from us, and because I wanted him to see me, to know me, before I took it back." Holmes nodded gravely. "You planned this, the note, the staging of the attack. You allowed suspicion to drift to Arkwright, to Hathershaw, even to Tolliver. You summoned the ghost of Chandler to walk again. But you never expected us to find the confession, did you?" Her hands tightened. "No, I didn't know he'd written it, I hoped, but I was prepared to let the silence speak for itself." "And if we had not come," Holmes asked, "would you have gone further?" Eleanor turned away. "You ask if I would have killed. The answer is no. I do not possess Sir Humphrey's taste for quiet murders. But I would have made sure his legacy rotted." Holmes was quiet for a moment. Then, in an even tone, he said, "Someone else followed your lead, someone less hesitant." She turned sharply. "You mean the attack?" Holmes nodded. "The man who grabbed you in the study, he was not acting alone. He had knowledge no outsider could possess. He wanted what was hidden in the clock. And I believe you know who he is?" She looked away. "I did not ask him to help, but I suspected." "Who?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then, "Hathershaw." We descended the stairs immediately, Holmes with urgency now in his step. The constable stood near the front door, nodding as we passed, but the steward's quarters, when we reached them, were empty. His bed untouched, the wardrobe open, the window unlatched. "Gone," Holmes said grimly. He knew the game was over the moment Eleanor did not claim the clock first. He waited to see who would reach it. And when it wasn't her, he ran. "Then he was the attacker?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, I see it now. He watched her grow up in this house, knew her secret. I believe he sympathized with her, perhaps loved her, quietly. But when she set her plan in motion, he acted to finish it, on her behalf or his own, and when he feared exposure, he turned desperate." I looked to Holmes. "And now?" "He'll try to disappear," Holmes said. "But not far. He'll want to collect something first, perhaps money, perhaps the ledger. He's clever, but not cunning. I've sent word to the yard. They'll catch him." Back in the study, Holmes placed the clock once more upon the mantel. "The hour struck, Watson," he said, "but not as anyone expected, not by poison, not by blade, but by memory, and in the end, that is the truest weapon of all." Outside, the rain had begun in earnest, steady, cold, cleansing. And within the house, the long silence of Sir Humphrey Tolliver's name began to unravel, one ticking second at a time. Chapter 14. The final clue revealed. It was nearly dawn when we returned to Baker Street, the streets glistening with rain, the city hushed beneath its grey veil. Holmes discarded his coat, removed the Tolliver clock from its wrappings, and set it once more upon the table, as though placing the final piece of a long, considered chessboard. The confession had spoken of guilt, the missing volume had exposed the family lie, and Eleanor had named the steward. Yet Holmes's expression remained distant, unsatisfied. "There is still something missing," he murmured. "We have the motive, the confession, the fleeing accomplice, but not the reason Sir Humphrey was afraid to the end." I sat across from him, bleary-eyed with fatigue. "The fear of being exposed?" Holmes shook his head. "He feared someone, not something abstract, not the weight of guilt. He wrote of the debt unpaid. He feared its collection. That implies a second party, a presence not accounted for in our present circle." He turned back to the clock, the mechanism now open, its secret compartment revealed and emptied. He studied its interior again, not for content, but design. Sir Humphrey had the clock altered, not merely to hide something, but to do something. His fingers traced a narrow groove along the inner panel. "Do you see this ridge? It's deliberate. The shape is not symmetrical. And here, these faint markings." I leaned closer. "Initials?" Holmes nodded. "Etched by hand, J.H. Jonathan Hale?" I asked. "But he was dead by then." "Precisely," Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. "So why are his initials inside a clock that Sir Humphrey had rebuilt after his death?" Holmes stood and paced. The confession says Chandler vanished in 91, Hale died that same year, but this clock, is dated 1893. Tolliver commissioned it after both events, and yet Hale's name lives inside it. He stopped, which means Tolliver was not afraid Chandler would return. He was afraid Hale had not truly died. I sat upright. You believe Hale faked his death? Holmes did not answer directly. Instead, he returned to the confession, rereading it aloud. I refused him. Hours later, he drowned himself in the Regent's Canal. Note the phrasing, Watson. Tolliver claims Hale drowned, but does not say he saw it. There is no report of a body recovered, only assumption. And Tolliver, racked by guilt or haunted by doubt, had the clock made not as protection, but as an alarm, a silent marker. If Hale ever returned, the clock would be the key. A long silence settled between us. Outside, the sky lightened. Then Holmes spoke again. Someone has been watching this house. Someone more cautious than Hathershaw, more silent than Eleanor. Someone who knew what was hidden and waited for the right moment to reclaim it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Do you mean to say Hale may be alive? Holmes turned to me, his voice calm but firm. I believe that someone using Hale's name, real or assumed, has already entered this story, perhaps not with violence, not yet, but with intention. They left a fragment of a note. They moved the clock. They nudged the wheel of this mystery into motion. I stood slowly. Then what now? Holmes turned back to the clock and tapped its empty heart. Now we set one final spring, not for vengeance, not for sentiment, but for truth. The final clue has been staring at us since the beginning. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small envelope, the original message received by Tolliver. When the clock forgets the hour, the debt shall be due. He held it up against the paper of the confession. Look here, the same hand, the same slope of the D. I leaned in. The resemblance was unmistakable. It wasn't Chandler who wrote this, Holmes said. It was Sir Humphrey himself. The silence deepened. He wasn't being threatened, Watson. He was warning someone, or perhaps confessing in code. The letter wasn't meant for Adrian, it was meant for Eleanor. Holmes exhaled. The final clue wasn't the name. It was the voice. Tolliver wanted her to find the truth, but on his terms. He looked toward the morning light. Now at last, we are ready for the final gathering. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The drawing room of the Tolliver residence was silent, save for the distant ticking of the upstairs hallway clock. It was the first time since Sir Humphrey's death that the remaining figures in his life had been brought together under one roof, seated not as family nor as guests, but as witnesses to a reckoning. Holmes had insisted upon the setting. No police, no magistrate, no press. Only the truth assembled. Eleanor Whitcomb sat nearest the fireplace, her hands folded tightly in her lap, gaze calm but unreadable. Adrian Tolliver leaned forward in his chair, pale and anxious. Beside him sat Captain Arkwright, arms crossed, his face a study in forced disinterest. The constable stood discreetly near the door, awaiting Holmes's signal. Holmes remained standing, the restored clock beside him on the table, its brass now gleaming, its secret compartment closed once more. "Let me begin," Holmes said, "by stating plainly what this case is not. It is not a tale of murder in the traditional sense, no poison, no knife, and yet it is steeped in death, the death of a man named Jonathan Hale, and the death more recently of Sir Humphrey Tolliver's peace of mind." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Eleanor's gaze flickered downward. "For 30 years a secret lay buried within this house," Holmes continued. "Sir Humphrey committed an act of ruin. He conspired in a fraud that led directly to a man's suicide. Or so he believed. The guilt of it stalked him like a second shadow, and when he feared that secret might rise again, he constructed a warning, a mechanical message, a clock that would stop the moment he failed to wind it, a silent signal that his past had returned to collect its due. He turned slightly toward Eleanor. Miss Whitcomb, or should I say Miss Hale, lived under that shadow as well. Her silence, her grief, her proximity to the man who destroyed her father was no coincidence. She sought truth and perhaps a measure of revenge, but she did not act alone. All eyes turned sharply. Clement Hathershaw, Holmes said. The steward, a man of silence and calculation. He loved Miss Whitcomb, or at least believed he did. He saw her struggle and chose to act where she hesitated. He staged the attack in the study, not to harm her, but to frighten her into abandoning her search. And when he failed, he fled. Adrian swallowed hard. But he's gone? Not far, Holmes said. He will be found, but he was never the true threat, merely the echo of one. Holmes stepped toward the table, hand resting on the clock. Sir Humphrey wrote the mysterious note himself. When the clock forgets the hour, the debt shall be due. It was a message. Not to his enemies, but to Miss Whitcomb. He knew the guilt would outlive him. He feared what she might do, and yet, perhaps, he wanted her to know. Eleanor rose slowly. And now I do. Holmes met her eyes. You do. And you have your father's name back. You have the confession. You have the truth. The question that remains is what you intend to do with it. She said nothing for a moment then. Nothing more. It is finished? Holmes nodded once. Then the final movement has played? Captain Arkwright snorted. And I suppose that leaves me out of it entirely. Holmes glanced at him. On the contrary, Captain, your debts are very much still your own, but for once, they're not the most dangerous thing in this room. The tension slowly released its grip on the gathering. Holmes closed the compartment of the clock, sealing the past inside once more. One truth remains, he said quietly. Time does not forget. It only waits. And with that, the gathering was done. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Holmes Explains. We returned to Baker Street that evening beneath a dry and cloudless sky, as though the storm had passed not only in weather but in purpose. Yet Holmes remained in his armchair, unspeaking, long after the lamps were lit, and the street outside began to settle into its usual hush. It wasn't until I placed a fresh cup of tea before him that he stirred, the lines on his face softening with a hint of satisfaction, though not triumph. "You've not spoken much since we left the Tolliver house," I said. "One would think a case of such complexity deserved at least a few of your usual flourishes." Holmes looked to me with a quiet smile. "Because, my dear Watson, it was never truly a matter of solving a crime. It was a matter of timing. Every piece of the puzzle was present from the beginning. It simply waited for the correct moment to be seen." I took up my pen and notebook. "Then let us see it as a whole. Start where you like." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Let us begin not with the crime, but with the clock, an antique French timepiece. Its hands stopped on the morning of Sir Humphrey's death, and the face began to alter, sliding hour marks, vanishing numbers. An impossibility? No, a device constructed to respond to routine, a final winding left undone, a trigger. Sir Humphrey built the clock to act as a signal. The moment it ceased to tick, he knew someone would come looking. I nodded. And the note? Written by his own hand, Holmes said. Its style, its ink, the slope of the letters, identical to the confession. The phrase, "the debt shall be due," was no warning from a villain, but a coded admission of guilt. He hoped the recipient, Miss Whitcomb, would read it and begin a search. She was, after all, the only one the message truly addressed. I frowned. But that suggests he wanted his secret discovered. Holmes tapped the arm of his chair. Precisely. Guilt is not always a chain, Watson. Sometimes it is a compass. He knew he would not face justice in life, so he engineered it in death. The confession, the clock, the clues, each one designed to guide the right person to the truth. And the right person was Eleanor, I said, Jonathan Hale's daughter. Holmes nodded. She lived her entire life under the roof of the man who ruined her family. Sir Humphrey took her in, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps to keep her close. She never revealed her true name, never demanded the truth, but she waited. And when the clock stopped, she acted, Holmes said, but not as a killer. She did not raise a hand to Sir Humphrey, nor did she destroy evidence. Instead, she set events in motion, the letter, the whisper of Chandler's return, even the staged attack, though that, I believe, was not her doing. Hathershaw, I said. Yes, the steward, a loyal man but not an innocent one. He suspected Eleanor's intentions. Perhaps he loved her, perhaps he feared what she might uncover. Either way, he chose interference. He staged the attack to frighten her, to stop her. When that failed, he ran. But you said something else at the final gathering, I recalled. That someone else had already moved the clock, that someone had touched the secret before any of us arrived. Holmes's gaze darkened. Yes, that, Watson, is the final riddle. Sir Humphrey believed Jonathan Hale had died, but the initials J.H. were etched inside the clock after Hale's supposed death. Sir Humphrey built that clock, not just to mark his guilt, but out of fear, the fear that Hale had survived. You believe he did? I asked, incredulous. Holmes was silent for a moment. No body was ever recovered from the Regent's Canal. No eyewitness confirmed the drowning. And the man Chandler, last seen that same year, vanished without a trace. My theory is this: Hale did not die. He disappeared, perhaps with Chandler's help, or perhaps by destroying Chandler himself and assuming his role. That ledger we found, every name in it was real. And they were all men Sir Humphrey had reason to fear. I stared at him. Then who left the torn note? Who removed the missing journal volume before we arrived? Holmes met my eyes. Someone who had already been in the house, someone who moved like a ghost. I believe Hale returned at least once, years ago, perhaps even recently, and left signs that only Sir Humphrey would understand. The clock was not just a container for guilt, it was a trap door. If opened by the wrong hands, it would unearth not only the truth, but invite retribution. But Hale never showed himself. No, Holmes said softly, because Sir Humphrey died before the final hour struck, and Eleanor, for all her pain, chose justice over vengeance. The past rose, but it did not consume the living. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the story settling into the quiet room. Holmes stood and crossed to the mantel, where he placed the clock once more. It stood now as it had in the Tolliver house, handsome, silent, unchanged. He tapped its surface once. This clock held more than time. It held regret, fear, memory, but in the end it also held a measure of hope that truth, once revealed, might be enough. I closed my notebook. And was it? Holmes paused. For some? Then he turned, eyes distant again, already walking back into the fog of thought where new mysteries waited to emerge from the mist. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. In the days that followed, the Tolliver case faded from the headlines with the peculiar haste of London society, which prefers its scandals brief and its truths unspoken. There were no dramatic arrests, no gallows prepared, and no triumphant announcements from Scotland Yard. And yet, in Holmes's eyes, justice had been served, not in the thunder of courts, but in the quiet course of consequence. The first to depart the stage was Clement Hathershaw. He was found within the week, hiding in a boarding house near Kentish Town, attempting to arrange passage to the continent under a false name. Holmes was informed by telegram of the capture, and though he offered no expression of satisfaction, I saw the slight easing in his posture that only comes when a weight long carried is at last set down. When brought in, Hathershaw neither denied his actions nor attempted to justify them. His statement, recorded in the presence of Inspector Gregson and quietly sealed from public release, confirmed much of what Holmes had already deduced. He had known Eleanor's lineage for years, having discovered it by accident through a misfiled letter she had once discarded. He had not told Sir Humphrey, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of something more personal. "I loved her," he said simply. Not in the way young men do, but as something I had sworn to protect. She was all that was good in that house, and when I saw her walking toward its secrets, I feared she would be broken by them. His plan had been crude, but, in his mind, protective. He had not meant to harm her in the study, only to frighten her into retreat. The use of clove oil, the darkness, the silence, it was all designed to obscure his identity. But panic had overcome precision, and when she screamed, he fled. The missing volume of the journal, which he had taken in secret long before, was found in his satchel, still intact. No charges were brought. Miss Whitcomb, Miss Hale, declined to prosecute, and Holmes, when asked for his opinion by the Yard, submitted a single sentence. The man acted with care, not cruelty, and his silence was punishment enough. So Hathershaw was released. He did not return to the Tolliver house, nor was he seen again in London. Rumour had him bound for a small town in the north, where he had kin and no need for ledgers. Holmes did not inquire further. Captain Arkwright, for his part, vanished in a very different way. His debts, long deferred and delicately juggled, collapsed shortly after our final visit to the Tolliver estate. 2 creditors appeared in quick succession, and by the end of the month he had sold his belongings and disappeared to the continent. Holmes suspected he had assumed a new name in Marseille, and would likely continue his losing ways there until fortune, or failure, claimed him for good. Adrian Tolliver, though found blameless in action, bore the heaviest mark of the ordeal. The revelations about his uncle's past, the unmasking of his steward, and the admission of his cousin's true identity left him adrift in the very house he once hoped to inherit without complication. In the days following the final gathering, he sought Holmes's advice. "I feel as though I have inherited a curse," he admitted, seated across from us in our Baker Street parlour. "This house, this name, it feels hollow now." Holmes regarded him with a measured gaze. "Then fill it with something better. The sins of your uncle need not become your legacy. A name is not only what it carries, but what it learns." To his credit, Adrian took this to heart. Within the month, the Tolliver estate was placed under a trust, with plans announced for its conversion into a hospital for convalescent veterans. Miss Whitcomb, he said, had suggested the idea and had declined any share of the estate, which brings us to her. Eleanor Whitcomb, Eleanor Hale, remained in London for only a short time after the case concluded. She met with Holmes once more before her departure, and I was present only as a silent observer to the exchange. "I don't know what I am now," she said, her voice low but certain. "I came here to find justice. Now that I have it, I feel no lighter." Holmes nodded. "Justice is not the absence of weight. It is the redirection of it. You carry it differently now. That is enough." She offered him a small, sad smile. "And the clock?" Holmes stood and placed it into her hands. "It was made to carry memory. Perhaps now it can carry peace." She left that afternoon, taking the clock and the confession with her. Where she went, Holmes never told me. But I believe it was far from the city, and even farther from the house that bore her father's silence. As for Holmes, he returned to his routine as though no case had passed. The newspapers remained unaware of the deeper truth, satisfied with vague reports of an old estate dispute and the strange death of Sir Humphrey Tolliver. Only those of us closest to the matter understood what had truly unfolded. One evening, as we sat in our rooms and the fire cast long shadows across the floor, I asked him the question that had lingered since the moment the confession was found. "Do you believe Hales survived?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He drew slowly on his pipe, his gaze turned toward the window, where the night pressed softly against the glass. "It's possible," he said at last, "but it hardly matters now. Whether it was the man himself, or only his shadow, the debt was paid. And sometimes, Watson, shadows are all that justice requires." I did not press further. The clock, I later learned, never ticked again. Eleanor had chosen to leave it unwound, a relic of stillness, its hands frozen at the hour of her uncle's death. Perhaps it was better that way. Time, once broken, does not always ask to be mended, and so the matter of the Tolliver clock was closed, not with a verdict or a verdict satisfaction, but with a series of quiet decisions made by those left standing. In another case, in another time, the lines might have been more stark. A villain in chains, a hero celebrated, the world put back in order. But this case had belonged to time itself. And time, as Holmes often said, is never content with neat endings, only with honest ones. Chapter 18. Holmes's Final Reflection. It was several weeks before I fully understood that the case of the Tolliver clock had left a mark upon Holmes that lingered more deeply than most, not for its difficulty nor its danger, but for its emotional architecture, layer upon layer of silence, memory, and guilt carefully arranged like the gears of that peculiar timepiece. I found Holmes one morning, standing alone in Hyde Park beneath a bare elm, gazing at the frozen surface of the Serpentine. He did not turn when I approached, nor speak when I greeted him. It was not until I said Eleanor Hale's name that he finally stirred. "She will not be remembered in the court records," he said quietly, "nor her father, nor the betrayal that unravelled both their lives. That, Watson, is the final injustice." I was silent. "And yet," Holmes continued, "there is a kind of mercy in forgotten names. Those who remember us shape our legacy, but those who forget allow us to begin again. She will not be Eleanor Whitcomb, the orphan raised by a guilty man, nor the ghost of Hale's disgrace. She will be someone else." We walked in silence for a time before I ventured, "Do you believe Sir Humphrey intended to make amends?" Holmes did not answer immediately. When he did, it was with the restrained certainty that always accompanied his more philosophical deductions. "I believe he built the clock with more than guilt. I believe he designed it to pass his shame along, not to punish, but to place it in the hands of someone he believed would carry it with care. He could not undo the past, but he could give her the choice of what to do with it." "And what of the others?" I asked. "Hathershaw, Tolliver, even Arkwright?" Holmes gave a small shrug. "They each acted within the limits of their nature. Hathershaw loved in silence and struck out in fear. Tolliver feared obscurity more than sin. Arkwright, well, he is not a man who considers consequence until it's pounding at his door. None were monsters, Watson, just men. Too late." We returned to Baker Street as the wind picked up, scattering brittle leaves along the curb. Holmes resumed his seat by the fire, but he did not reach for the violin, nor his pipe. Instead, he regarded the empty space upon the mantelpiece where the clock had once stood. I had half expected him to keep it, a relic, a trophy of sorts. But he had sent it away just as he sent away all things once their purpose was fulfilled. And yet he looked at the space as though the shape of it still remained. "There's something deeply cruel," Holmes said at last, "about time, Watson. We think of it as constant, yet it stretches and shrinks in ways we cannot control. Sir Humphrey tried to trap time in that clock, to stop it, to delay its judgment, but time always arrives." I said nothing. I knew this tone well. It was not melancholy, it was clarity. Holmes rose, turned from the fire, and reached for his overcoat. "Come, Watson, I believe the fog will return before evening, and there's an old case in my files I'd like to revisit, something about a music box in Chiswick. No more clocks, I promise." I smiled, taking up my cane. "For now." We stepped into the London air together, the street humming faintly with life, and the mist just beginning to gather at the edges of the cobblestones. The past, like the fog, was never truly gone, only waiting to be seen when the light caught it just so, but for that moment it stayed behind us. And Holmes, as always, walked ahead.